Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob Atkinson. I'm president of ITIF, and we're pleased you can join us today. We're in a little bit smaller group than we do sometimes, and I'm not sure what to make of that other than everybody's in Pittsburgh and who's interested in this stuff and getting their hotel room ready. But I think we'll make up for that, more than make up for that in terms of the quality of the presentations we're going to hear today. So this then is to talk about a new report that ITIF is issuing today on how G-20 countries have used IT in the stimulus packages over the last year. And so we've spent the last 3 months really looking in depth at what all the countries are doing. Some are doing a lot, some are doing virtually nothing. But most are doing something, and we're going to talk about that today. And then we're joined by two panelists. Our colleague from the Korean Embassy, who I apologize ahead of time, he was listed as being a panelist to talk about Korea's experience. He unfortunately could not make it. His president is in town, and when your president is in town, you get called away to do more important things. But we're very pleased to have two very good panelists. Tim Kelly. Dr. Tim Kelly is the lead ICT policy specialist at InfoDev, which is at the World Bank here in DC. He's responsible for access and mainstreaming ICT into development. So in other words, getting all the units at the World Bank to think strategically about the importance of ICT. This is really a great initiative, and Tim's taken the lead on that, so we wish him all the best on that, because as we've written about, and you all, I'm sure as well, have thought about or written about, ICT is central not just to developed countries, but also to developing countries. Previously, he was head of strategy and policy unit at the ITU, International Telecommunications Union, where he worked between 1993 and 2008. And before that, he was with OECD, and then also with 3 years with Logica Consultancy. So he has a long background in IT and IT policy. He has a PhD in industrial economics from Cambridge. He's written many reports. He's co-authored more than, or written or co-authored more than 30 books, including ITU's Internet Reports, World Information Society Reports, and others. Valerie Latraverse is joining us. She has been the Science and Technology Counselor at the Canadian Embassy since 2005, where she focuses on S&T policy and building partnerships between the U.S. and Canada. We were talking ahead of time a little bit, and Canada is sort of one of these, it's sort of like the Rodney Dangerfield of S&T policy. It's really, I urge you to really look at what Canada's doing. They really have some very innovative innovation policies, whether it's in broadband or industry-university partnerships, R&D tax credit. Their R&D tax credit is about 6 times more generous than the U.S. credit, for example. And Valerie's job is to make sure that we know about that. So, and she's doing a very good job on that, I have to say. So it's changed since she's gotten here. Prior to coming to DC, she opened the Canadian Consulate in Phoenix, Arizona. She's before that worked at Industry Canada and managed the information highway programs, including Connecting Canadians and Electronic Commerce. She was also executive director of the New England Canada Business Council. She has an MBA in international business from Concordia University in Montreal and extensive other experience. So with that, I'll maybe talk for 10 or 15 minutes. We'll give each of our panelists about that amount of time. We'll adjourn precisely at 1:30, and we should have plenty of time for informal discussion, Q&A. So that's what we are. Okay. So why are we talking about this? You know, it's pretty clear most economists, unless they're extremely sort of supply-side conservative, free market, Milton Friedman types, that fiscal stimulus needs to play a key role in economic recovery, not just monetary policy. If you have those stimulus that just gives people money and says, hey, here's $500, we're going to get a tax rebate, the lion's share of that money is going to go to what economists would call consumption. They go out and they buy dinner, they get a new t-shirt. It doesn't go to investment. Now that's good on one hand in the sense of goes to consumption, spurs job creation, job retention, but it fails to do the second thing that stimulus can do, and that's put in place the kinds of investments that are going to drive long-term quality of life, long-term productivity, long-term competitiveness. Stimulating ICT, so example, roads would be one of those. Building roads would be a way to do investment. but so would be stimulating ICT. And we think that, as you'll see, this is probably the biggest area that has the most bang for the buck, both in terms of the short run on job creation and the long run on productivity growth and competitiveness. So in our view, it's critical, or we talk about it, it's very important what countries did, and it's also, we don't think it's too late to continue to do more. So where do you get your growth? You basically get it in two ways. Certainly growth in the ICT sector itself. The ICT sector, employment is growing 9% on it, almost 0.09% in the OECD. Wages are higher. The latest BEA data, and I should have put this slide on there, I apologize, I didn't. If you look at the latest U.S. Commerce BEA data on investment, what you see is between 2005 and second quarter 2009, so that period 2005 to second quarter 2009, what you find is that overall capital investment in the U.S. economy is down. Manufacturing investments down about 20%. Housing investments down about 55%. IT investment is actually up 9%. So it's one, if you will, it's the one area of capital expenditures in our economy that's growing. And we think that that means it has the potential to be this engine. But also clearly the biggest gains from IT, or is what our Canadian and most of the rest of the world colleagues call it ICT. We're like also not on the metric system, Valerie. It's really about the use. So 80%, if you look at most of the good economic studies, if you look at how does IT affect productivity growth, about 80% of it is in the sectors that use ICT, not just the sectors that are building it, whether it's in the semiconductor, computer, or software, or telecom side. So it's the use of ICT in a wide variety of sectors that drives growth. This is, by the way, I think the biggest area, and maybe directed to Tim, but to everybody, the biggest mistake I think most countries make is their ICT strategy is about the ICT industry, and they really ignore or give very, very limited attention to ICT use through the economy. So if you look at China, for example, 20% of the productivity pickup in China, productivity growth in China, is just due to ICT use. Now that's a pretty big number. In the U.S. it's about 100%, by the way, or 80%. But in the U.S., in China, that's a big number given all the other ways that they've been growing. So ICT has bigger impacts. The other interesting thing, if you're a neoclassical economist, you would argue this cannot be true by definition, because all investments should have exactly the same impact, because you keep investing up until the marginal return equal the cost of capital. Well, for some strange reason, that's not the case. There have been a lot of studies that show that ICT investments actually have bigger impacts on productivity and bigger impacts on profitability. We have an event coming up in October or something, I don't know, middle of October, it's on our website, with Eric Bernholson, who is an MIT economist at the Sloan School there, and probably the world's leading IT economist. He's got a new book coming out, a very nice book, really short, really easy to read, no calculus in the book, on IT and productivity and profitability and all that stuff. And it's very clear what his evidence shows is we can talk about why, but IT has this big outsized impact. And this is probably Tim's research. I don't know if it is or not, Tim, but it's certainly World Bank research, value added in enterprises using ICT. So pretty clear evidence around the world, not just in developed, but also developing countries. But also ICT creates jobs. And so we did this study back in January, partly at the behest of the transition team, to look and see if the U.S. were to invest in $10 billion in three infrastructures. And then we remodeled this now with the actual investments. So the U.S. is about $39.2 billion in these three infrastructures, so broadband, health IT, and smart grid. As you can see, 7, 2, 19, 13. And we estimate that that would create or retain, these really should be create or retain, not just create, over 1 million jobs because of that. And over half of those would be in SMEs, which would be defined by SBA as less than 500 employees. One of the reasons why IT creates more jobs is because of what we call the network effect. So, for example, when you go and when the U.S. built the interstate highway system in the 50s, It didn't just create jobs in the pavement industry and the asphalt industry and those jobs and in the supply chain of that. It created all these other jobs. People bought cars now because you could drive across the country. Builders built big suburban homes, big tracts of suburban homes. The whole grocery chain industry, a whole set of industries emerged built on this network. Well, today, if you invest $50 or $60 billion as we did in highway funding, nobody's going to go out and get new tires for their car. Hey, we're repaving the road, I'm going to get new tires. It has no network stimulus effect anymore because it's a mature, fully built out network. These networks, we would argue, have these secondary network effects in terms of job growth. So for example, in broadband, I can't remember who did the study, we have it in our report, it's either Forrester or IDC did a study. They found that when people get broadband, within the year, on average, they spend, I think it was, I apologize on the number, it's something like $250 extra on computing equipment if they get broadband in that year. And so I don't know all about you, but when I got broadband for the first time, I had to go out and buy a new computer because the one I had was so bad it really didn't take advantage of the broadband connectivity. Or we bought speakers because now I could stream music. And so people buy all of these sort of ancillary devices to make the broadband work better. So that's sort of on the one end. On the second end, there are all of these other applications that now work better. So e-commerce, social networking, e-government. Health IT, same things. If we start getting ubiquitous, for example, telemedicine, people are going to be buying webcams and other kinds of devices. Smart grid is the classic example of that. If we have smart grid, what will end up happening will be Whirlpool will start putting sensors in washing machines. People will replace that on a more frequent basis. The whole notion of being able to have a grid with two-way connectivity and measurement, you'll be able to enable the growth of the renewable energy industry. So building these platforms, if you will, these IT platforms, doesn't just create jobs in building the platform and then down through the supply chain, but also creates jobs in these network effects. So what are countries doing? What we found countries are doing is virtually every country in the G20 is doing something on IT and stimulus. Some countries are doing a lot more. Here's an example. If you're going to, Valerie's going to talk about Canada, so I won't do that. But France, for example, $1 billion in initial investment in 10-year, $13 billion plan, but $1 billion this year. Japan, $370 million in broadband. Japan has an audacious goal. What do they call it? Big, hairy, audacious, BHAG, yeah, big, hairy, audacious goal. 90% of homes in Japan are going to have fiber to the home. Actually, they're at 80 now, but the stimulus was going to get them to 90 and also to 100% of everybody having wired broadband in Japan. South Korea, again, upgrading. They really have a big goal. They want to get to a gigabit network and see the stimulus package as a way to get to a gigabit network to the home. Smart grid. We actually in the U.S. have probably the most aggressive stimulus package on that, allocated $11 billion for smart grid projects. We have a few places in the U.S. where that's happening now, but most notably Boulder, Colorado. But the key thing there that I think a lot of people mistake is it's going to cost a lot more than $11 billion to make our entire electrical grid smart. But you don't need the government to put all that money in. What you need the government to do is to get enough projects underway that people see it, that it works, that the technology works, that the consumers accept it, that the marketplace accepts it, and then it becomes one of those things where regulators start to put it into the rate base and other utilities start to do it. So a lot of these areas, the role for government is to get that ball rolling down the hill and then have the market and other players start picking it up. But you can see other areas there. France, $4 billion to upgrade their smart grid. Korea, we've got a new report coming out in a few weeks or a month or so, benchmarking the U.S. against Korea, Japan, and China on on green energy, clean energy. And Korea is unbelievable. They're at, if we were to do what Korea did in green energy, we'd be around, I think, I'm going to get this wrong because we had two different numbers, but north of $300 billion. So Korea has made a massive, massive investment in their stimulus into green this being just one modest component of it to modernize their electric grid. So they are probably more than any other country are looking at stimulus as a way to transform their entire economy, to get the short-term benefits of stimulus, but the long-term benefits of transforming their economy. Health IT and other areas, U.S., again, the leader there, $22 billion, some of that direct money, some of that reimbursement money. I was reading an article in Business Week recently where they were talking about a hospital that had put on hold their plans to buy and upgrade a big multi-tens of million-dollar initiative on IT in their hospitals. They put it on hold for now. The stimulus came out. They decided now to go forward with it just precisely because of the stimulus and the ability for them to get better reimbursements when they finish their system. Canada, again, Valerie will talk specifically about what Canada's doing there. $465 million on health care. Japan doing a lot of different things, intelligent transportation systems. We have a new report coming out on that soon, looking at who leads in intelligent transportation systems. Japan, world leader in ITS, as well as broadband. Interesting, they actually put a bunch of money towards e-government to modernize, to move them even farther along there. And a lot towards energy efficient IT, so whether that's virtualization of servers or other types of things. France, interesting, again, a wide variety of things there, Web 2.0, the whole initiative on serious gaming, which is something I believe the Obama administration is going to be looking at quite seriously. Serious gaming, no pun intended. They're going to be seriously looking at serious gaming. Serious gaming, if you don't know, that's basically taking your Xbox or your things like that, and developing games that are serious, that are not just for fun, but actually for fun and learning. So learning calculus or learning other kinds of science on gaming. Turkey, interesting. Turkey has had very, very high taxes on telecommunications and very, very high taxes on computers, partly through their overall VAT. And there's a pretty good evidence around the world that high taxes on IT products, that the elasticity is quite high, over 1 in most cases. So that's one of the reasons why some countries have been thinking about how do we spur IT adoption. The Chinese have done this with appliances, including IT and computers. They've reduced the taxes there. But Turkey's reduced their VAT on computers and permanently reduced their broadband tax. So they had a 15% tax on telecom, but reduced it to 5%. So really, what can countries do? I think one of the things, if you look at sort of what's worked and success, it's clear to us that you have to have a variety of tools. Tax policy is an important tool because it gets things done quickly. Grants take longer. So countries that have put in place both tax and grant, I think, are going to see are going to see impacts sooner than they might have other countries. Tax on the demand side and sort of reducing taxes on the use of IT, even if it's temporary, will have impacts. Direct investment, whether that's government grants for broadband, all sorts of things. These are critical to get these big projects underway. And then there are certainly some regulatory things that governments can do, even though they're maybe not quite in the same category. There are things that governments can do to spur demand. Last, I'll just close by saying, we did a report that we've released in the UK called the UK Digital Road to Recovery. We did it with London School of Economics recently. It's sort of the same exercise but in the UK economy to see how it would work in a smaller economy. And one of the pushbacks we got from talking to a number of government officials over there was we don't have any money, which is a legitimate point. Governments a lot of times don't have any money. But the pushback I said to them was, you're going to be doing this, you're going to be making these investments. There's no question you're going to be putting a bunch of money into ITS over the next decade. You're going to be putting money into your broadband programs. Just bite the bullet and do it now. Front load those investments to the extent you can. You're not raising your overall 5-year budget. You're not adding to your deficit over a 5-year period. You're just front loading investments in order to not only drive job growth in a short period when you have excess capacity in your labor market and your supply markets, but you're also going to be getting those benefits sooner than you might otherwise. So while I'm very sensitive and I understand the notion that governments have budget constraints, they in theory don't have budget constraints over a longer period of time, and as I said, can front load those. Secondly, these investments need to be large enough to make an impact. I mean, I think the $11 billion on smart grid is just about the right number. It will make an impact. 7.2 in broadband, which is what we did. Frankly, I think it should have been more like 15 billion. I think 15 billion would have had a much more serious impact on getting a lot more homes connected than otherwise would be the case. It's important to think about the role of how we can get individuals and SMEs engaged here. For example, some countries have school PCs in schools, tax incentives for PCs, things like that. And lastly, ensure that regulations and tax policy do not hinder ICT investment. On the one hand, government's moving forward and doing these things, and on the other hand, you have some countries that, for various reasons, are doing things that would be going in exactly the opposite direction. So I'm going down to Argentina for a talk tomorrow, and Argentina's done I guess it's a proposal, Ryan, or it's a proposal that they're floating to essentially raise taxes on computers.
I think on notebooks, but there's still computer peripherals, monitors, projectors, digital cameras.
Yeah. So the idea is we're going to raise taxes on anything that's imported, which in Argentina's case is virtually everything is imported. And somehow this is going to lead to some job creation in some mythical way. It's sort of like the EU doing their tax they're putting a tax on cameras and tariffs and things like that. At the end of the day, again, all the studies show that when you do this, essentially what you do is you reduce adoption of these technologies, which then reduce economic growth. So I think that's a key thing for countries to consider. So with that, I'll turn it over to Valerie and hear what is going on in Canada. So she's going to probably still wait to hear it. Valerie's got a slide.
Lower the mic quite considerably. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I wanted to talk a little bit about ICT in Canada and its role in our economy to start, and then talk a bit about our stimulus plan. Rob's touched on some of the major points, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. And then just have a look at how we're doing, how Canada's faring in this recession. Just to start, and I'm focusing on the industry. So not really getting into how ICT is transforming other industries, but this will give you a good sense of how important it is to our economy. We've got about 30,000 companies in Canada working in the ICT sector, and for us it consists mostly of small companies. We have about only 120 companies with more than 500 employees in the sector in Canada. So as you can see, very important for our small businesses, about 24,000 companies in the ICT industry in Canada, which generates close to 150 billion in revenues. And it also makes quite a large contribution to our GDP, contributing 57.6 billion in 2007. So that represents about 4.7% of Canadian output. And that's going up considerably every year. It was, in 2002, it was about 4.2%. And on average, annual growth in the sector has been about 5.1% since 2002, which is almost twice as fast as the overall economy at 2.7%. And the faster growth also means that the ICT industries have accounted for 8.3% of Canadian GDP growth since 2002. Not to go on about give you too many statistics, but 3.5% of all Canadian workers were employed in the ICT sector in 2007, and this is going up. In terms of how the sector has been faring in the recession, of course there have been some declines, and I'll speak a little bit about that later, but overall the sector has been less affected than other sectors. And again, to reiterate some of the points that Rob made, it's a knowledge-intensive workforce, higher than average wages. So very important to us in terms of building a knowledge economy. Major source of jobs. And in Canada, another important point is that they're the largest, the industry is the largest performer of R&D in the private sector. And in Canada, compared to the United States, we have a very low percentage of R&D that's performed in the private sector as opposed to the United States. So anywhere where we have a significant percentage, we want to make sure that the industry grows. I'll go on to our economic plan. We entered the recession a little bit later than most of the other advanced economies, and we've done better in many ways. And you may have heard that according to the World Economic Forum, we've got the strongest banking system in the world and among the best fiscal position in the G7. And in fact, I think it was our banking system that really saved us. Our government decided to focus on short-term stimulus measures coupled with long-term strategic policy objectives. One of the things we're working on right now actually is developing a plan for digital economy. And in addition to some of the things that I'll be talking about, the government reduced taxes, paid down debt, and invested heavily in infrastructure, much like the United States, in roads and bridges and et cetera. The total of our package is $40 billion over the next 2 years, 2.9% of our GDP. And the goal is to emerge with more modern and greener infrastructure, like investments in our smart grid, a more skilled labor force, lower taxes, and a more competitive economy. The federal government projects that the stimulus package will protect or create 190,000 jobs in Canada. In ICT specifically, the nearly $1.5 billion will be invested in this area, and I'll quickly go through the major points. One is broadband access. As you know, it's one of the key components of the digital economy, and we have some experience in investing in broadband, which reaps some great rewards, if you will. And at this time, only 5% of Canadians do not have access to broadband. So the goal of the stimulus is to invest $225 million to access the underserved and rural areas in Canada. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the earlier investments we made in broadband in a couple of slides. We just actually launched our call for proposals, so it's a little bit early to tell what the effect of this investment will be. But basically, we've targeted a number of communities in Canada which do not have access. It will, again, to reiterate what Rob has said, we believe that it will encourage economic development, spur innovation, improve quality of life. So there are some social benefits as well that were taken into consideration when deciding to invest in broadband. It's also got a profound effect on small businesses and allowing them greater reach, new markets, etc. Particularly in the rural areas, we see that it will have a tremendous effect. And the Information Technology Association has estimated that another measure that we took, which I don't think is on this slide, is to deliver 100% capital cost allowance for computer hardware and system software. And it's estimated that this will have a $700 million effect on the ICT marketplace in the next 2 years. Some of the other items on the slide, this is a slide that's broader than ICT, but it's all interrelated to our belief that in order to become a competitive knowledge economy, we have to make some investments in various other places. So here we've got some investment in, well, just a small one on the bottom, Institute for Quantum Computing in Waterloo, Ontario, so that which is a world-class research facility. So we're trying to increase our investments, in particular in targeted institutions across Canada. We're also investing in an industrial research assistance program to help our small businesses be more competitive in the economy. And the IRAP program is similar to, well, you don't have an equivalent here, but I would say SBIR-like program, but it really helps. It's more of an advising kind of program that we have. We committed $200 million to that. I've just got so much, and I don't want to go over my time, but I guess the next major investment is in electronic health records, where we'll be investing $500 million. Just to get back to broadband, we have a history, as I mentioned, of investing in broadband, and starting in the 1990s, which is one of the programs that I worked on, we had a Connecting Canadians initiative, which the goal was to connect every Canadian to the internet. And one of the programs was a community access program, which reached out to all communities. In the days where people didn't have their own personal computers, libraries and schools offered computer access to communities. And at one point, I think we had 8,800 community access sites across Canada, and that's obviously dwindled over the years, and we're going to be phasing out that program. But that's just to give you an example that early on we knew the importance of having access to the internet and the benefits that it could garner. And then in the 2001 or so, about 80% of Canadians were connected. So we invested some further money, and which leads us into the position now where we're 5%, or 200 or so communities in Canada which do not have access. So as I said, the call for proposals just came out. And then another, just to focus in on the information highway, health information, like the United States, many of the similar issues regarding to health, and Canada recognizes that we have to make some investments in health IT. So starting in 2001, we created a nonprofit organization called Health Infoway, which was developed to foster, to sort of act as the champion, if you will, of electronic health record adoption in Canada. And to date, our federal investment in this area is $1.6 billion, plus the stimulus money, another $500 million, which brings it to $2.1 billion. And the way, the goal is to have have 50% of Canadians with electronic health records by 2010, and 100% by 2016. And the way that it works is that the Canadian government provides all the money to this nonprofit, this Health Infoway, and Health Infoway works with each jurisdiction, the provinces and territories across Canada, to implement a number of, it's not just electronic health records, but it's getting all physicians online, etc. And they use a gated approach to the release of funds, which means that there are specific targets before they'll further disperse some funds. And of course, again, as the discussion in the United States, why do we want to, why is health IT so important? And again, we see all these benefits: quality, productivity, access, and it's estimated that the benefits would exceed $6 billion annually. And it's also thought that our investment will be paid off fairly quickly in this area. I focused on broadband and health IT, but another important aspect is some of the investments in science and technology that are that our government as well. I think we're investing $2 billion to update and modernize our university facilities across the country. And this particular government will have spent, I think, $5 billion in S&T related initiatives this year, which is sort of a never seen in the history of Canada. So obviously all ties into the knowledge economy, productivity, competitiveness, etc. This is just a slide related to health IT, how we're positioned, having started in 2001, Canada's in some ways ahead of the United States in this particular area. So where are we now? This is a statement from the Prime Minister's website that 80% of the funds have started to be dispersed in this area, and I think we're getting good reviews around the world about our economic plan: timely, appropriately sized, diversified, and well structured. And that's just a website for the action plan. And just wanted to as well, like where I saw today that the United States seems to be coming out of the recession. For us, the projection is that early 2010 is when we forecast that we'll come out of the recession. And in terms of the effect of the recession on ICT, as I mentioned before, there have been some declines and there have been some job losses and decline in manufacturing, but overall a sector that's really faring well compared to the rest of the economy. So Rob had asked me to speak a little bit about the rationale for investing in IT, and I think the short answer is that we've had some experience in investing in these areas, and we've seen that there've been some reports, and I'm happy to share them. But the investment in broadband, for example, can bring 10 times the initial investment in terms of into the local economy, and 15 times, I think. That's one report in effect to the GDP. So we've done it. It works. So we're doing it again. And then in the case of electronic health, it was an area that we'd already launched. So it's shovel ready, I guess, if you will. And so if you have any questions, let me know.
No slides, I'm afraid, but happy to share with you some findings from this report, which is actually available on our website, the World Bank website. It's the Information and Communications for Development Report 2009, Extending Reach and Increasing Impact. It has a chapter in particular on broadband. This is just the summary of the report. It's online. Well, thanks, Rob, for inviting me. It's a great study you put together, and very impressive numbers in particular. I think one of the things that this study reveals is how broadband and interest in broadband and the ICT sector more generally is now extending well beyond the developed economies to some developing ones. The figures you put together, for instance, for economies like Turkey, China, Mexico, etc., show that economic stimulus packages is not just a phenomenon of the developed world, but it is very much an interest and a concern now for the developing world. In fact, more than 180 countries now have broadband worldwide, and if we look at the worldwide market for broadband, there's about 1 billion users as of mid-2009, and they're split almost equally between fixed line users. We tend to think of broadband as being a fixed line phenomenon, but also mobile broadband users. If we define broadband as having access to the internet at speeds in excess of 256 kilobits per second, then probably now the majority of broadband users worldwide are on mobile networks, and probably 2009 will be the year in which the number of mobile broadband users exceeds for the first time the number of fixed line broadband users worldwide. Now, obviously, your report covers many different sectors, tax breaks, for instance, for the IT industry, smart grids, health investment, education, etc., digital literacy projects. And those are all very good and add up to some quite considerable numbers. But I think in my presentation I'm going to focus on broadband, because really that is the underlying technology behind a lot of these different sectoral investments. And I think broadband has the capacity to be a general purpose technology, a GPT, a technology that drives innovation and investment and growth in other sectors. We can think of other general purpose technologies like steam at the start of the 19th century, rail at later on in the 19th century, electricity at the start of the 20th century, microchips in the late 20th century. Arguably, what the world needs now for economic stimulus is a new general purpose technology, and because of its ramifications in sectors like health, education, government, I think broadband probably is the strongest contender for that at the moment. In this report, we did some research, which actually you cite in your own report. We looked at what the effect would be of a 10% increase in different ICTs, like fixed lines, broadband, internet, etc. What the effect would be of a 10% increase in penetration on global economic growth. We looked at about 200 or so different economies in the period between 1980 and 2006. And you actually report the figure for the growth in developed countries, which was that a 10% increase in broadband is equivalent to about a 1.2% increase in global GDP in developed economies. But what's perhaps more interesting is that if you look at developing economies, the equivalent figure is 1.4%. It was 1.4% compared with 1.2%. In other words, what we're finding is that although the impact of broadband on economies is quite remarkable, it's even greater in developing countries than in developed ones, as you might expect, because there's no effective substitute really for broadband in those countries. So what we found is that the impact of investment in mobile networks is greater than in fixed line. The impact of investment in broadband networks is greater than investment in narrowband. And the impact of investing in developing countries is greater than the impact in developed ones. So what are the arguments therefore? Why should governments be involved in broadband? After all, if the sector is growing so effectively and efficiently on its own, why would governments want to be involved in what is, by all measures, a private sector-led investment? I think there are three basic arguments for government interest. Stimulus we'll set aside as a sort of separate case argument, but I think looking more generally at economies, there are three arguments which you might summarise as the three E's: efficiency, equity, and the environment. In terms of efficiency, economists justify investment in infrastructure sectors like broadband because of the spillover effect, because of the network externalities. And it's interesting that worldwide countries have committed just over $50 billion to government spending in broadband as part of their economic stimulus packages, so it's quite a big number. But beyond efficiency gains, there are also equity concerns. It's clear that access to internet, access to public information on the internet is in many ways a public good. The broadband itself is not a public good, but the information which the internet contains does have the characteristics of a public good, and therefore governments are legitimately concerned with equity interests, increasingly access to high-speed information, high-speed internet, which in turn gives access to relevant, up-to-date information, is very much essential to life chances. And the third is environmental concerns. It's clear that investment in broadband is very much a green-centred investment. Broadband obviously provides a basis for remote collaboration, for telecommuting, for other activities which effectively displace the need for movement of goods or people. So three E's then: efficiency arguments, equity, and environments. I want to, just in closing, talk about three countries in a little bit more detail. We've obviously heard from Canada, and we've heard a little bit more about what's happening in the US, but I think three other countries illustrate why governments are so interested in broadband at the moment. I'll talk about Korea, Australia, and Egypt. Korea is perhaps the most interesting analogy at the moment that we have, because Korea's original interest in broadband came more than 10 years ago, just as Korea was emerging from its own financial crisis, the Asian fiscal crisis of the late 1990s. And Korea really targeted investment in broadband as a way of driving the economy out of that recession. In particular, it invested in areas like national research and education networks, NRENs, in the education sector. It invested in e-government applications, and it invested in health applications. It also put a lot of money into digital literacy projects to, if you like, raise the general level of digital literacy within the country, particularly amongst those segments of the population that might not otherwise be reached. And we can really see the benefits now in terms of Korea's uptake of broadband. Korea was for many years the international leader in terms of the uptake of broadband. It's been overtaken more recently by economies like Denmark, the Netherlands, but it certainly, as a large economy, still well up there. It has over 90% household penetration of broadband, for instance. And during that period between 2000 and, say, 2007, Korea succeeded in doubling the percentage of its GDP that it derives from ICT services. And I think the benefits are also evident in other areas. For instance, as I said earlier, Korea put a lot of emphasis on investing in broadband as a way of driving education within the country, both through ICTs in schools projects, ICTs in universities, but also, as much as anything, putting broadband into homes, which meant that school kids in Korea had access to, if you like, the world's largest digital library that's available on the internet. And it's not coincidental, therefore, that Korea is actually the fastest growing country in terms of improvement in educational attainment as measured by the OECD's PISA program. I think that's the Program in International Student Assessment, PISA. And they show that over the last 6 years or so, they carry out studies in 2000, 2003, 2006. The 2009 study is awaited later this year. But during that period, Korea was actually the fastest growing in improvement in educational attainment. The second country I want to talk about is a country that hasn't nearly done anywhere near as well as Korea in broadband, and that's Australia. But Australia is a country that depends very much on international communications. It obviously, as an isolated country, it has traditionally depended on trade and communication with the rest of the world. But historically, Australia has lagged in terms of its broadband penetration. One of the reasons for that is there was no effective competition between cable network operators in the country and fixed line telephone operators, because there was no effective cable industry in Australia, sorry. Another reason was that although Telstra was exposed to competition as long as a decade ago, in many parts of Australia there was no infrastructure competition, and Telstra for many years priced broadband on the basis of bit caps. In other words, you could use, say, a megabit or a gigabit of information a month, and then thereafter you'd have to pay extra charges, which was a great disincentive to broadband use. So the Australian government really tried very different ways to persuade Telstra to invest more in fibre optics, to persuade it to invest more in rolling out broadband networks. And Telstra was reluctant because it felt that if it invested in fibre, it would find that fibre was then opened up to competitors, and it would be investing on behalf of its competitors. But eventually the Australian government effectively lost patience with Telstra and decided that if it couldn't get the private sector to do it, it would do it itself. And probably Australia is the one country that's put forward a more ambitious plan than any other in terms of the amount of public sector money that's going into broadband. It's committed $43 billion in public sector money. Now, it's not clear how much of that will actually come from the Australian government. I should say that's 43 Australian billion dollars, which is about 33 US billion dollars. So it remains to be seen, on the one hand, whether the Australian government will call Telstra's bluff and actually build its own broadband network. It's quite astounding to think of a government wanting to build its own broadband network, but that's certainly the direction it seems to be going in. It's identified that broadband has such great benefits to the economy and said if the private sector won't build it, let's build it ourselves. The third country I want to talk about is again a lagging country in broadband. Egypt has about 780,000 broadband subscribers at the start of this year, and is faced, like many developing countries, in a situation where the fixed line network is still effectively a monopoly, and it's the mobile network where investment in broadband has gone ahead in leaps and bounds. Now, Egypt has identified that broadband is critical to its economies in a number of ways. Firstly, in raising ICT literacy, it's put a lot of efforts into PC clubs, for instance. And secondly, by attracting foreign direct investment. It's had some success in attracting FDI in the ICT sector, but it wants more. So broadband is seen as being critical to the economy. So the question then is how to raise the level of broadband within the country. And Egypt, like many developing countries, is now following a strategy which is really based on mobile broadband. On the one hand, it's issuing WiMAX licenses to try to encourage new investors in the sector, and it's also encouraging the existing mobile licensees, 3 mobile licensees, to invest further in broadband by giving them access to 3G spectrum. So for Egypt and many other developing countries, it's probably mobile which is going to drive the rollout of broadband. So to conclude, I think we've seen in the 2 presentations earlier that broadband investment is an effective form of investment in more than one way. On the one hand, it provides economic growth and stimulus, but beyond that, it provides green growth through encouraging collaborative meetings, telecommuting, intelligent transport systems, etc. And just turn back to the case of Australia, for instance. Australia did a study which actually calculated that it could meet something like 80% of its commitments under the Kyoto Protocol for reducing greenhouse gases simply by investing more in broadband through savings like telecommuting and intelligent road transport systems. So I think the challenge that faces us, therefore, is to work out how governments should intervene and how they can intervene and how they can do that without distorting the operations of the private market. I think that's the challenge which countries like Australia are now facing, and which certainly countries like the US will also be facing. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Valerie, if you want to come on up, and we can. So we have a little less than half an hour for comments and discussion. I should also thank my colleagues Daniel Castro and Scott Andes, who got to the back of the room, who were the lead authors on this report, and then Scott in particular tracking down an enormous amount of information to put this all together. So comments or questions? Roger, if you can identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Roger Cochetti. I provide advisory services to companies in the technology sector. And one of the questions I have regarding the role of IT or ICT in stimulation, the stimulative packages, is the issue of the lag effect. It's well known that if you go back over the past several decades, when a bank converted from paper to electronic records, basically there was a reduction in productivity. There was a huge capital outlay, followed by a reduction in productivity as everybody was confused on how to do this, followed by a period of stability, and then a growth in productivity, followed by a period of innovation, and then significant productivity gains. But the significant productivity gains lagged the investment by, take your number, but it's more than days, and And you could say the same thing about the federal highway system, or almost any investment. There's a lag between the date of the investment and the date of the greatest productivity gains, the ones that you're really looking for that stimulate wage increases and stuff like that. So the question I have is that when, I haven't seen anything empiric, and everybody has anecdotes and impressions, but have any of you seen anything or addressed the issue of the broadband, whether it's done through, tax or outlays? You're still a physical measure, and what's the lag effect in broadband investment?
Well, just a couple of things on that, Roger. First of all, in some ways, one could not wish for a better technology system to invest in a downturn where you get the job benefits immediately and the productivity benefits when the recovery occurs. That's perfect because even though there's pretty convincing evidence from the OECD and other studies that overall productivity isn't associated with high unemployment levels, it certainly makes the recovery longer. That's where you get your wage gains and your income gains, but it's somewhat at cross purpose. So to the extent that productivity lags, but job growth is immediate, that's a wonderful thing. One little just back.
The immediate job growth is setting the thing up, building it.
Building it, you get all your jobs.
Yeah.
Plus you get people who go out and they buy a new PC, and so you get all of the kind of multiplier effects right away. But then the efficiency gains kick in a little later, and that's where you might get other kinds of opposite employment effects, at least in the short run, or in the immediate term. We did a little study, haven't published it, but a little thing where we looked at all the recessionary quarters that NBER defines from 1947 to 1995. If you go back and look at all those quarters and you add up what's the productivity level in those quarters, it's 0.2%. So when the U.S. was in recession in the post-war period, it could only grow productivity on an annualized basis 0.2% per year. This was given that the overall average during that period of time was 2.5% approximately. Productivity in recessions just tanks. In the last recession of 2001, 2002, and this recession, productivity's averaged 2% per quarter. So 10 times higher productivity growth in the post-internet period. And I don't think it's not just a coincidence. I think the way the economy works, the ability for firms to get advantages, productivity advantages, is very, very high. So on the one hand, I think that's why the labor market lag has been so significant in the last recession and is projected to be significant in this recession. But the silver lining on that dark cloud is that when the U.S. economy comes out of this recession, it's going to be probably about $500 million to $1 billion larger than it would have been absent this. So the fact that companies are able to extract productivity is ultimately a very, very good thing. If you look at the last quarter numbers, we're 6.3%, 6.2%. Phenomenal rate of productivity growth in a downturn when companies are supposedly lowering production more than they lower headcount. So, Tim, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the argument that there's always going to be a lag between, on the one hand, invention and then innovation and then mass diffusion, that's a very well understood argument. And I think one way of looking at it is in terms of the microchips, which I think were arguably the last great general purpose technology which drove most of the growth of the last few decades. I mean, the microchip, you can really trace it to the late 1960s, arguably even earlier, but it was not until the early 1980s that it was actually, microchips were performant enough to be able to develop personal computers, and then we've probably seen the real impact of microchips on productivity only really in the 1990s, so almost a 30-year lag. Now, if my argument that broadband is a similar general purpose technology, then one would expect to see a similar time lag between the if you like, the mass impact of broadband. But one thing which is evident at the moment is that in forecasting microchip evolution, that so-called Moore's law is often cited. In other words, the performance to price ratio tends to double every 18 months. Now, from the work that we've done on broadband, the performance to price ratio for broadband seems to double every 15 months. In other words, the cycle seems to be a little bit faster. So we may expect the impact of broadband to be more visible in our economies at an earlier date. Having said that, probably career is the best example that we have at the moment, simply because we have the most years of time to study how broadband has affected the economy. And certainly in indicators like productivity, like educational attainment, like the percentage of the economy which derives from ICT services, then career is doing very well on all of those indicators. What we don't know, though, and obviously we can't tell for the moment, is what is the productivity effect of, say, a gigabit per second broadband network as opposed to a megabit per second broadband network. Is the effect just incremental, or is it really a qualitative shift?
Scott Cooper, American National Standards Institute. One of the things I liked about how Rob set this up was he put it in the context of the G20, which is topical. But I think one of the concerns we had with this latest recession is that, especially on the financial industry, it was a retreat to nationalism. So we saw sort of financial autarky in so many cases from Northern Rock on down. Pleased to hear about Canada sort of being able to avoid a lot of the problems that some of the other developed countries have had with their financial systems. But it seems like one of the things that we could really use at this point in time is something that really does sort of restir that idea that it is a global economy and that we're all kind of, in it together. And I'm not too sure it's going to be finance. I think we've already sort of gone down some very strange rabbit holes there. But it seems like with IT, you've got an opportunity to kind of find something that everybody is agreeing is sort of a driver, or should be even more of a driver going forward. So I guess trying to put these two ideas together, do you see anything at the G20 or coming out of, in a sense, what this is this new opportunity with this G20 concept? It isn't the G7, it isn't the G8, it isn't the UN. I mean, it seems like we got an opportunity to kind of craft this. And so based upon, Rob, sort of how you crafted this event, would anybody have some ideas about how we can take the G20, not only in Pittsburgh, I think even more so next year in Korea, which is a great place to be doing IT, where we can sort of embed IT issues and hopefully solution sets into the G20 concept?
Just to say basically that it's no longer about the G7 these days. I mean, if you look at economic growth, particularly in the ICT industry, but also in other sectors as well, most of the growth is occurring outside of the G7 in places like China and India, and therefore I think the need for an expanded world view is very important. If we can change direction from broadband to mobile for a second, I said there are about 1 billion broadband users, but there's more than 4 billion users of mobile phones worldwide, or at least mobile phones in use worldwide. And the shift from 3 billion to 4 billion, which took place within the space of 2.5 years between 2006 and 2008, that extra billion occurred almost entirely in the developed world. And as broadband gets rolled out, deployed more worldwide, certainly we'll be expecting to see the majority of the growth in places like India and China, and it's more likely to be growth on wireless-based networks than fixed line networks. So absolutely, I think that the need to look outside the G7 is very important.
Yeah, I mean, the point I would make, Scott, is I think the challenge is that for many of the G20 countries, that G20 is predominantly, or at least a core focus of it is the economies of these countries. And for many of these countries, they're being advised by economists who frankly do not understand ICT. I think this is a big problem. I mean, back 18 years ago when Michael Boskin said computer chips, potato chips, what's the difference? He was actually speaking for many economists today, including economists that are in power today in many countries. They fundamentally don't think there's a difference between $1 of potato chips and $1 of computer chips. By definition, they have to be equal because they're both worth $1. And they would disagree with what Tim said. Why is there a government role here? Isn't the market going to do all this? Because they diminish or they dismiss the whole issue of network externalities, of public goods, of a whole set of other market failures that will lead to lower rates of ICT deployment and adoption. And finally, in a piece we wrote this last week, which in the Democracy Journal, which the editor renamed the title on, which was the title of the piece, First Re-Educate All the Economists. But anyway, I didn't have that title, but the piece I have, there was, we need to get economists to understand innovation. There are a lot of economists who push back that this is legitimate stuff to be in stimulus packages. I was at a panel down at the new members retreat in Congress, and before me, Barry Bosworth and Larry Lindsay were both up there bad-mouthing this stuff, saying we shouldn't do this, and there's no point to it, and just use monetary policy and a little sort of smart fiscal policy on the tax side. And so there's a big, I think, education effort that needs to be made that this is going to be central to global recovery. It's going to be central to global growth as we go forward. And also, as Tim's pointed out, I think ultimately, and we haven't done research on this, but it seems right, ultimately central to making the world work as a place. If people have connectivity, if they know what's going on around the country, around the world, they're going to feel more connected and not just in their own little piece. So, I'm a true believer, obviously, but to me, it's the evidence and the research is there to make this a central driver of G20 policy for the next 5 years.
I just wanted to, and I agree with you. I think, before consensus can be reached and an agreement that yes, even in Canada, I would say there are some skeptics. But, an example of what we could do, however, just on the North American continent, is in smart grid, for example, Canada and the U.S. I know we're doing some things together, but we're already so interconnected, our electrical grids, and if we can work on those kinds of things together, even within the North American context, then I think that then maybe we can look at something else. But I think building blocks may be the way to go.
David Olive from Fujitsu. Keying a bit to your last response, Rob, but in general, several of us who worked in this area, both domestically and internationally, have tried to argue that definition of infrastructure should include ICT to get away from it's just merely bridge building or road building, and this is an important enabler. We've made some progress in this area, and the question I guess I have is that unfortunately we don't need to have an economic meltdown or a global recession to kind of prove the point. But are we getting across to the policymakers that we do have an idea here? Your studies, other studies, the Canadian example of how this helps growth, productivity, an enabler across the section are very, very helpful. But are we sustainable with this approach, or do we still need more work?
Well, my own view is we're making a lot of progress. I mean, look at the U.S. response in 2001. Nothing, to the recession, and nothing. There was zero of this stuff in that response. So I think we're seeing, and you look at what Canada's done, and the countries we dug in, the U.S. I mean, so I think we're making a lot of progress. Question is, are we making enough? No, but we're making a lot of progress. I think, David, you hit the nail right on the head. The key is defining this or redefining this as infrastructure. And what it really is, it's intangible infrastructure or invisible infrastructure, or both. IT infrastructure is mostly intangible. It's about standards and protocols, things like that, or the other parts of it are invisible. Broadband is mostly invisible, unless I guess you can see your wires, but they look like the other wires. So when I have fiber to my home in Bethesda, you can't really tell that there's fiber there. It just looks like a wire up there. Whereas if you go out and you build a bridge, or you widen the road, you can put a big sign up that says, this is being paid for by stimulus monies, thank, Governor X. So it's a little bit harder for that reason, and it requires imagination in the sense. But I think that's just incumbent upon all of us to make that case. I don't know, Valerie, if you want to comment on that. How did Canada be able to see that this intangible infrastructure is so important? I know you alluded to that a little bit. But...
Sorry, how we can demonstrate? Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, that this is infrastructure. It's just like building a bridge or a sewer line.
Well, I think I think we have to do a better job of promoting our people, and I think that in Canada, you know, we've had, history's been on our side and geography in the sense that it's kind of part of our, how we define ourselves now, because we have such a large, expansive country. Or telecommunications early on became something that we were dependent upon, and we had to, you know, we developed the first long distance call in Ontario, for example, and we invented the telephone and things like that. So I think for us,
Yeah, I think he was in America when he did that, though. Guy Bell.
well, yes, well, we like to, yes, well, we like to say invention Canada. But anyway, for us, so I don't think we have as much of an issue with that in Canada, frankly. But you know, it's still like in the United States, the big sign about that very tangible bridge is, you know, very much a phenomenon that we have to live with as well.
Maybe we could insert pop-up ads in the broadband. This broadband brought to you by Governor X, and I'm trying to get him unelected.
Telework enabled by, you know, all the good things that people are like shopping, you know,
Sure.
anything.
And could I just add that studies by World Bank and your institution help in kind of giving the tangible benefits, and so please continue to do them.
I think there's still a job to reach the trade negotiators. You talked earlier about the fact that Argentina is actually going in the reverse direction, actually putting new taxes on some ICT products, and certainly there's been relatively little progress in the trade negotiations. The Doha round was kicked off in 2000, and still looking for a successful conclusion to that.
Yeah, I mean, we could just scrap Doha and do an IT and services round, which would have a lot more promise of passing and a lot bigger impact. I'm actually quite serious about that. I mean, I think moving forward on an IT and services trade agreement that would get all of this sort of building on the information technology agreement of 96, I guess it was 96. It seems to me a very promising area, and I guess going back to this other point that you know you must face every day, Tim, and I see so many countries try to take this this sort of shortcut to growth, like the Indians putting a tariff on imported computers, saying, oh, we're going to grow our computer industry. And what Indian economists have shown, academic Indian economists have shown very clearly, all they're doing is limiting PC ownership and PC adoption. But the governments don't see that because that's really intangible. You don't see people buying a PC in their home, but you see the PC plant or the PC factory that opens up and does that. So I think it's very important that this intangible infrastructure is very, very broad and very, very diffuse, and that's really the key to success for countries' economies. Other comments?
I have a question just in terms of your report, and have you thought about any, or are there any kind of frameworks that exist to assess, I guess, the results or the impacts of the stimulus? I mean, how would you recommend that a country assess the impact of these kinds of investments?
That's very well. You know, it's interesting because when I was in, let me answer that two ways. When I was in a couple of the transition team meetings back in October, November, December, and they were asking me these same questions, and I was like, very interesting. Are you going to do this for any of the other parts of the stimulus? Oh no. So in one way, it's a legitimate question, but it's a question to me that I feel is an unfair question in many ways because none of this sort of none of this sort of methodology is being applied to things like net operating loss carry forward. Does that have any effect on anything? Who the heck knows? How about the tax rebates to consumers? I mean, so in one way, I think if we're gonna hold these kinds of investments to an accountability standard, we need to hold all investments to an accountability standard, which isn't happening right now. Secondly, I would say the other way to do that would be to track, on a project-by-project basis exactly what's happened and how much money was invested, and then run it through multipliers and see what happens there. I mean that, and then the other way to do it would be if there's some sort of way to, look at projects that got funded and projects that didn't, and you know, is there effects in 2 to 3 years in various places and things like that. One might be able to figure
And
out,
then, of course, there's the long-term effect,
which is harder to measure, and then a lot of these effects permeate through, and you don't really know why that's the case and all. But Tim, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, just one thing. We talk about sort of economic stimulus packages as if they were a sort of homogeneous sort of theme, but in fact they're not. If you look at how different governments, and I think this comes out very well in the report, how different governments are choosing to invest in ICT in their economic stimulus packages, they're very varied. The US government in its broadband component is focusing very much on rural broadband, which is certainly a very necessary and efficient use of money. But other countries are rather putting money into improving the quality of their broadband networks by investing in fibre, by setting targets for what level of service will be achieved nationwide. And I think there's another argument to have, which is the form of investment the most efficient way of using the available resources? Maybe not.
Well, and I guess another piece of this too, which is to not avoid the question, Valerie, but is essentially to kind of go back to my other point, which was, you know, whenever anybody says to me, well, should we do this? My answer is usually, look, in 10 years or 15 years or X years, every home in the U.S. and every home in Canada, except, you know, that remote cabin up in the Northwest Territories. Is it still called the Northwest Territories? It was split in
Well,
two.
there's no neglect.
Yeah. So sure, they might not, but everybody else is going to have broadband. Every American and every Canadian will have a personal health record, electronic health record. Every electric grid in every home will have a smart meter. I mean, these are just a matter of time. They're going to happen. And so, in some ways, sort of saying, do these things work? To me, the answer is, are they accomplishing their goal of moving us forward along this inexorable path that we want to get there sooner rather than later? If they're doing that, then to me, they're a success. And the fact that we're doing more of it during a period of a downturn with slack economic resources is just, you know, we get, double benefits for it.
So yeah, I mean, I guess in the short term, you're saying, in short term, we measure the job creation and the projects, and then 10 years from now.
I mean, I guess these would be a failure if, for example, the money went to companies that didn't really build something, or they built something that didn't work. But if they're building something that works, you know, they're putting in broadband and it actually works, or they're putting in health IT that work, then to me it's a success. Neil and then Scott.
Neil McDonald, Federal Technology Watch. Is there any chance that the stimulus spending by the different governments will actually lead to some issues for the World Trade Organization further down, particularly because of the intangible nature of the investment into telecommunications and ICT generally?
Yeah.
Without having thought about it, my first response is yes, certainly it will. I mean, insofar as the money is being a subsidy to investment, a subsidy to private sector companies, then certainly that is straight away a WTO issue. However, insofar as it is being invested in other ways, for instance through public sector investment, using the public sector as, if you like, a procurer of goods and services, and providing the procurement of goods and services is open and transparent, then perhaps not.
I just want to add, I mean, one issue for us actually is the Buy America on some of the it's contained in some of the stimulus package. So yeah, so it's had an effect on Canada in that sense.
Were you waiting for that opportunity?
So talk to your yeah, it's particularly not necessarily in broadband, but in health IT, it may become an issue for us, and in wastewater area as well, wastewater technology.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of China in particular with procurement restrictions that only their companies can apply for. But overall, I think the nice thing about this stuff is it's really, in many ways, it's about sectors that are non-traded: health, telecommunications, electrical. These are non-traded sectors. So they're inherently less open, I think, to some of these trade barriers than, say, a factory. Last question.
I guess, though, that building off of that, the success, I think, of this industry is going to be the implementation. And then we do, I think, get into exactly those questions. And you raised some interesting issues, or at least covered them briefly, such as health IT, interoperability, smart grid, things like that, where it seems like what we would want to have is a lot of agreements ahead of time so that we can get the economies of scale. And certainly, I think between the U.S. and Canada. And I couldn't get a good feeling whether that was actually going on, where we were having those kinds of discussions between either our industries or our governments as to making sure that what was done north of the border was compatible and hopefully interoperable with what's going on south of the border. And especially things like health IT, you want that fungible. You want that to be as universally available as you can make it. And the sooner you start crafting that into the solution set, I think the more likely you do it. Again, that goes back, I think, things like the G-20, maybe we need to give them some marching orders about things they should be looking at beyond just the immediate needs of the economy and the finances.
That's a good point. I mean, yes, we do work, I know, we do work with the United States, again, on smart grid, and we're working together on that, on standards, and this is not related to this, but on nanotechnology, for example. So we're working very closely with NIST as well on that. On health, I'm not sure, actually.
If you want to know the answer to that, you have to come tomorrow at 9 o'clock, because we're releasing a new report on explaining international leadership in health IT, where we've looked around the world to find out who are the leading countries. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but if you read the event, they give you a clue with who's on the panel. So with that, thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking Valerie.